What's your biggest financial lesson? Well, here to talk with me about the financial lessons that were biggest in their lives are three financial planners. Joining me to talk about this is Joey Stemmel, who's with Riverstone Wealth Advisory, Haley Tolitsky with Cooke Capital, and CJ Miller with Sensible Money. Everyone, welcome.
Hi, Bob.
Hey, Bob. Thank you.
So what's really interesting about this topic is from a financial planner's perspective, everyone thinks that maybe you haven't, that you're already living what you talk about, but there are lessons that you've learned that are instrumental perhaps in both in your careers and personal lives. CJ, you want to go first about your biggest financial lesson?
Absolutely. So for me, it's all about building strong habits. You know, when I graduated college and got my first entry-level job in the financial planning business, I had gone from living paycheck to paycheck and kind of growing up that way to having some disposable income. And I learned really quickly that it's easy to overspend your account as your liabilities grow. And really, you know, if you're not budgeting on a regular basis, you don't even know where your money's going. So it becomes difficult to set savings targets and move up in life at all.
So talk a little bit about you in the article, you talk about how you had a rude awakening 6 months after you graduated.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was deferring my student loan payments during the grace period. And at the time, it was about $335 a month. And so, you know, I had budgeted in for my rent. I had just moved in with my now wife, then girlfriend. And so we were kind of living it up and taking vacations and weekend trips all over Arizona. And then those student loan payments hit. And I had no idea where I could cut my budget because I wasn't tracking where I was spending on. So it wasn't like, oh, buy less groceries or, you know, cut some subscriptions. I had no idea where I could even get started on cutting because I wasn't budgeting in advance.
Right. And you built yourself a spreadsheet?
I did. You know, I'm kind of nerdy when it comes to Excel. So I built out a huge spreadsheet that had, because Mint didn't work for me. I couldn't do the categories I wanted. You know, my wife and I, we were doing separate budgeting. And so we would have like categories and subcategories and Venmo each other all the time. And now we're in You Need a Budget, which I highly recommend for people that don't want to do that much work.
Right. And then besides tracking your money, you also started saving for retirement. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in pay yourself first as a mentality. I think it comes from the book, The Richest Man in Babylon, which is a great airplane read. And really the whole idea is that usually when you get paid, you think about all the other people you need to pay. You know, your car payment or the grocer to buy your groceries. But really what you should be doing is taking anywhere from 10 to 20% of that income and paying yourself first, putting it in retirement savings or, you know, a brokerage account to use for later in life.
So, Joey, I want to turn to you. Your lesson is really an interesting one. It's about the trade-off between interest rates and investment returns. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so you know, my story starts right out of high school, going to college. So I bought a brand new car and had a part-time job, and it was really about the car was to hang out with friends, right? And that's not necessarily the job, but I got a great rate at 2% because my mom helped to co-sign my loan. And I was always taught from an early age that you pay down your debt. So you get your paychecks and the focus should be paying down the debt. You should stay away from credit cards, things like that. And it wasn't until I entered VCU, took some finance classes that I started to better understand you know, the time value of money concept and really weighing investment returns versus interest rates.
So talk a little bit more about that, because I think that's a question that a lot of people have. They're told sometimes that they should pay down their credit card debt because it's at 18%, but maybe not pay down their mortgage because that's at a lower interest rate.
Exactly. So I think, you know, the biggest piece is looking at the interest rate. So if you have a credit card that's at 18, 20+%, it's going to be hard to probably get a rate of return consistently in the market. So in my situation, my loan was at 2%. My payment was about $300 a month. And I mean, I was putting anywhere between, you know, $700 and $1,000 a month towards my loan payment. I mean, I thought I was doing the right thing. I'm paying down this debt. I'm not having to worry about longer term, you know, paying a loan for 5 years. I'm going to pay this sucker off in 3 years. And I was at VCU. I was in a personal finance class actually with the CFP, And he was going through a couple of different examples of should they pay down debt, should they invest, and we got to one on a mortgage. And he's like, should this person pay down their mortgage aggressively, or should they invest the money? And most of the class was kind of going with the concept, let's just pay down this mortgage. And I remember he slapped 3 times on his podium, no, no, no. And that's when he went into this whole spiel about, over the long term, if you have the cash flow, take another 100, 200, 300 a month, put it towards a non-qualified brokerage account. And if you have the right type of allocation, so I know me personally, I'm an aggressive investor. So over the long term, if you average what the S&P 500 has, 7-8% versus your mortgage, which in my situation, I'm in the low 3s. I hope over the long term, I can average better than that interest rate. And what it really does is it gives you the flexibility. So, 15, 20 years down the road, if it's still a priority to pay off your mortgage quickly, you have the flexibility to do that. But if down the road, I want to, maybe buy a vacation home, if I want to take a bigger trip, paying for potentially kids' college education, I have the flexibility with this non-retirement specific investment account.
Right. And you mentioned in your article that weighing whether you should pay down debt more aggressively or not depends, or invest it depends on many factors, your goals, your time horizon, your risk tolerance, et cetera. And then you also end with a little bit of piece of advice around time horizon.
Exactly. So I think the time horizon outside the interest rate is also really important. So, a mortgage, let's say a 30-year mortgage over the long term, I'd expect the, markets to probably get you that 7-8%. If we're talking about 6 months, if we're talking about 12 months, it's kind of a crapshoot. And I think it kind of comes down to your personal preference. So, my rule of thumb is if you get into this kind of 4 or 5% range, then you kind of, defer to your own type of philosophy. But when you start looking at something at a 3-year, a 5-year, a 10-year, depending on how aggressive you are in the market and maybe how optimistic you are in the market, it could be better to invest that money versus paying down your debt more aggressively.
Right. So, Haley, let's turn to you. You too have a personal experience with your biggest financial lesson having to do with establishing an emergency fund.
Yeah, and hurricanes. My story is kind of stressful. So I moved across the country from Michigan to North Carolina to start my career as a financial planner in the fall of 2018. It happened to be 2 days before Hurricane Florence hit the North Carolina coast. And so I started my first day of work on Monday. I worked a half day and my boss said, you have to evacuate. This is going to be very bad. It was projected to be a category 4 or 5 hurricane. And coming from the Midwest, I've never experienced anything like that. So not only was I very stressed about my situation, I was only renting a home, but very nervous. A lot of people were saying that our whole island where I was living was going to be destroyed, but also the financial stress that comes along with that. So I had to evacuate for 8 days in the Great Smoky Mountains, 8 hours away. There was a lot of expenses associated with that. So the gas to get there, maintenance on the car, paying for a hotel for 8 days. And I had my pets as well. So packing them up and, making sure I had enough supplies for them was extremely stressful. So thank goodness I already started to build an emergency fund in college because I didn't even receive my first paycheck yet for my real job. So I was able to pay for all of those expenses without any stress. I didn't have to go into credit card debt to pay for any of those expenses. And I was actually able to enjoy the trip a little bit and get to do some tourist activities while I was out there. So it's really, really important to have an emergency fund because it could be tomorrow when you face an emergency and you want to make sure that you're not going into credit card debt and you're able to pay for those emergencies when they arise.
Yeah. So let me pose this question to all of you. Any thoughts, reactions to each other's financial lessons and comments about whether you have a similar experience or something to add?
I have a very similar experience to Joey right now. I just purchased my first home in the fall of last year with a 3% interest rate. And I'm someone that does not carry any other debt. So I really would love to mentally pay down the debt on my mortgage. However, as Joey was explaining, I understand that over a 30-year period, it makes a lot more sense to increase my retirement savings and get that growth in the market versus paying down that mortgage now.
So I would say, Yeah, I would say full disclosure on that. I always struggle with 0%. It's like on paper, when I get a 0% opportunity, I'm like, this is great. I'm gonna get to borrow someone else's money for 9 months and 15 months. And then when I look at my budget every month, I'm like, oh my God, I just need to pay this off. The stress around the 0% and having that debt hang over my head is kind of a behavioral finance piece. And something that really stuck out to me in CJ's article was I had a similar experience. Graduated college, I had some extra cash flow, and I'm like, you know what? I'm a financial planner. I know what I'm doing. I don't need to automate my savings. That's for other people. And then after six or 9 months, I was like, you know what? I'm spending a lot more money, and so I started to have an auto deposit go to my savings directly out of my paycheck, so it wasn't hitting my actual checking account, which is a concept I feel like we preach to our clients all the time. I started doing that myself, and I ended up saving even more money. So even a small tweak from a behavioral finance perspective for myself has led to longer term savings.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the behavior is so important. That's what I took away from Haley's story is the emergency fund. When you're in that spot where there is an emergency, for some people, money's the last thing you're thinking about. And that's really where you can get into trouble, because even if you have the emergency fund, you're not thinking about where your money's going, what you need to spend on, or how expensive that hotel is, or even calling your renter's insurance and saying, hey, can you guys subsidize any of this for me? And then the emergency lasts a lot longer, because when the adrenaline wears off, you have to sit with those decisions. So yeah, it's really a challenging place to be.
All right. Well, let's hope that we can do this again. Maybe there's a second biggest financial lesson that we could talk about, or maybe some other round robins that we could do.